Welcome to the Configure Price Quote Podcast. My name is Frank Sohn and I'm the founder of CPQ Consulting. This podcast is 100% focused on Configure Price Quote, also known as CPQ, and will provide you useful insights into this topic. Hello everyone, today I'm joined by Tom, a seasoned consultant and career builder with over 30 years of business experience. From his early days at Accenture to leading strategy of a 600-person quote-to-cash consultancy at ATG, which was acquired by Cognizant, Tom has a remarkable track record. He even spearheaded the award-winning Aim Higher program, creating hundreds of jobs and generating significant economic impact. Now Tom has started a new venture, Craton Consulting, ready to share his experience in consulting and talent creation. Welcome back to the CPQ Podcast, Tom.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be with you.
Very excited to have you on, Tom. And let's start by telling me a little bit about yourself. If there is anyone out there who hasn't heard about you, right? So what should they know?
Well, I like to call myself a quote-to-cash nerd. I've been working in this space for 35 years and took a little break about 2 years ago and found I really missed it. And clients were needing good quote-to-cash, objective, transparent consulting, and got back into the game with Craton Consulting.
Excellent, and very excited to have you on, but I want to go a little bit back further, right, to ATG. What was the moment you knew the Missoula Solution Center was going to be something truly special?
That's a great one. Probably when clients first started coming up to little old Missoula, Montana, a 60,000 person college town in the Rocky Mountains. And, people came and they got off the airplane and the terminal was a little smaller than they were used to. The air was a little cleaner than they were used to. They walked into our office and there might have been a few dogs running around, maybe even a kid or two. And I think right away that idea of hungry but humble consultants that were working hard to be the best in the world at their craft, consulting with transparency and honesty, sharing what we know, becoming experts in the space and helping clients through what's some of the hardest processes that exist in enterprise IT. And I was always proud of the fact when I got back on that airplane, they had good memories, good relationships built, and some great quote-to-cash advice. And that continued through the years. We would bring people, and it culminated in what we called the Quote-to-Cast conference, which unfortunately COVID put a halt to. But we'd have people, 200 quote-to-cash nerds like myself, who'd come from 30 different states, 12 different countries. We'd put people on a fishing boat. Maybe it might be head of product for a billing company and the CIO from one of their major clients. Get a fly fishing guide, a 6-pack of beer, 2 breakfast burritos, and go build a relationship. And those events help build a lot of trust and transparency and really put Missoula on the quote-to-cash map.
Very cool. So, but you also had the Aim Higher program, right? Which helped bring people from non-tech backgrounds into the quote-to-cash space. What stories stand out for you from that experience?
Yeah, boy, I'd have to say that's the highlight of my career, Frank. We've long been partners with the University of Montana. In fact, I'm sitting at the University of Montana as we speak. And when we started ATG, we started to work very closely with the professors in the MIS and consulting programs. And when we were acquired by Cognizant, some of Cognizant's senior leaders came to town when we were hosting one of our competitions that we had for juniors who were in an MIS program learning Salesforce. And they got to put on a suit, stand up, and talk about the project that they'd been working on, simulating the roles of project manager, business analyst, tester, and developer. And when we were done, about 75 people had presented to us, and the Cognizant executive said, well, how many of these people are you going to hire? And I said, well, probably 2 or 3. And he looked at his notes and he said, okay, by my list, I'd hire 58 of the 75 that I just saw as juniors before they get a degree. And of course, Cognizant hires about 150,000 people per year. And one thing led to another, and we created the Aim Higher program, which was a really innovative partnership with the University of Montana to take people from all walks of life, from the service industry, from education, from bartenders, baristas, fitness instructors, foresters, and run them through a 12-week paid training program where they learn Salesforce and they learn the art of consulting. And 225 graduated, 225 got full-time jobs with benefits. And so very life impacting, especially for a small college town. And, I get to walk around town and see all these people and, thanking me for helping them start a career. And I thank them for helping us, build successful quote-to-cash practices here in little old Missoula, Montana. So it was a great relationship and a great win for the community.
Hey, that's really something. I hope you find a lot of copycats when they listen to the podcast, right? So that's a really good program. Now, one question I have to ask someone as experienced as you are, obviously, is you have a career where you went to multiple firms, you have tons of experience. When you look back right now, what's one or two pieces of advice that you think are really can make a difference for someone who's just starting out in this whole field?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I'd say pick an ethos. I like hungry but humble, right? I've been in this space for a very long time, but there's always something new to learn, as we both know in this CPQ and billing space. And the advice that I give, and I'm with students, college students a lot, is be intentional. The first step is figuring out what you want to do and what you want to be. I very often ask people, do you want to be famous, rich, powerful, or significant? And very often, they think about it and they say, I'm not sure. And I say, well, I wasn't sure until I was about 35, right? And so that's okay to not be sure, but the more you know what it is that you want to be and what you want to become, the more you can start to intentionally create what that vision and plan is for yourself and for your career. And we took that into how we built our companies. We were always providing a very clear vision to our employees and to the market and the plan for how we were going to get there. And we would ask all of our managers to work with the individuals to see what is their vision and plan for this next chapter of their professional career. And very often when we found alignment, we found our rock stars. We found the people that were really going to grow with the vision of where we wanted to take the company. And very often we had people who maybe said they wanted to be rich and they wanted to double their salary in a year. And we learned that the vision and plan maybe weren't aligned. It's good that we find that out now. So intentionality and really knowing what you want to become is probably the advice I give the most.
I think it sounds very simple, but I think that's very good advice, very sound. Now, what do you do when you don't work?
Well, I live in Montana, and so it's wonderful to be able to take advantage of the outdoors. We have the Clark Fork River running right through town, so I love to get out and jog or just walk. There's mountains and trails all around. I love mountain running. I like spending time with my family. We have a new cat. I didn't know I was a cat person until Winston came along, so I've enjoyed spending time, in the winter with the cat when it's a little bit harder to get out and go running in the mountains. And I like skiing and just hanging out with friends.
Okay, so typical stuff you do in the mountains, right? So, but one question I have to ask you also, since I'm in Fort Collins, I think that's location-wise similar to Missoula, right? So, not quite, but close. How did you come up to build this whole business in Montana? Because that's not the typical place where you would expect a business like that, right? So,
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good story. Remember when I gave those four things? Mine was significance. I didn't really care to be rich, and I really don't want to be famous. But I did want to be significant. My mom and dad were pillars of the community, and they were very significant in town. And I always looked up to them when people would look up to them as you'd walk down the street or meet somebody at a restaurant. And I always wanted to come back to my hometown. And I saw that there was not a lot of great jobs here when I moved back. And I worked from my basement for a period of time and then met a fellow who taught consulting. And I said, you're teaching consulting at University of Montana? Maybe I should meet some of these consultants, and was introduced to two of them and hired them part-time, and two became 10 and 10 became 30 and 30 became 300 before I knew it. And so, yeah, I think that was wanting to be significant and feeling like, and here in Montana, I have wonderful partners. So the governor is the former head of Right Now Technologies, one of the first SaaS CRM tools. The president of the University of Montana was the former head of digital transformation at GE, and the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor and Industry, Department of Indian Affairs. They're all wonderful collaborators to try to help build jobs and build economy in the state. And it's a privilege to get to do that every day.
very cool. And build good jobs, right? So that's the thing in a place where you wouldn't expect it. Excellent. But now let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about CPQ, because you've been doing this for a long time. We talked about it now for quite a bit, but you have a new endeavor now, Craton Consulting. Tell me a little bit more about that and what you do there and what you try to do.
Craton is probably the most complicated three-person company in existence. So first, a little bit about Craton. And it's timely that I named it that. I named it Craton a little bit before the AI revolution of the last several years. It's a geological term. That's the part of the Earth's crust that has achieved long-term stability. And the analogy I was trying to make is, the top layer of the Earth's crust is going through earthquakes and volcanoes and avalanches. And it's an analogy to what's happening in technology and what's happening in the world with macroeconomic affairs, political turmoil, pandemics, right? Everything is changing. And what can you count on? And I feel like my clients always told me I can always count on ATG for transparency, for trust. You're hungry but humble. You'll tell us what you really think. You'll lay your cards out on the table. You'll call me out if there's something I need to do to get to the outcomes that I'm looking for. So for us, Cratons are things like integrity, trust, hard work, resiliency, humor. These things that are very human conditions we find make great consultants. And when you put great consultants together, you can do great projects in this very difficult space. So what Craton does is there's three of us, Tom, Kate, and Kevin. I'm the instigator, Kate is the orchestrator, and Kevin is the integrator. So they're three incredible humans. And what we're trying to tackle right now is helping clients and quote-to-cash ISVs and investors in those ISVs to figure out this space, to provide those Cratons of deep expertise and honesty and transparency to an industry that needs it. So that's the first thrust of what Craton does. The second is I'm assisting other small boutique SIs to lift off the ground in quote to cash. So lots been going on. So a couple of years ago, I helped form the Whole Group, which is a pure play ServiceNow consultancy. And as you know, they've recently launched sales and order management are in the quote to cash space. So excited to see, ServiceNow and all of its deep capacity and engineering excellence in the quote to cash space. I think they're a very welcome addition. The second is Ravis, which is in the SaaS billing space. Another difficult, right? Can't have good billing without good CPQ sitting in front of it. And most recently, I'm excited to announce that we're partnering with the Insight Studio, which is an existing Montana-based HubSpot consultancy. And HubSpot recently purchased Cashflow and is another new entrant in the CPQ and billing space. So once again, another tech titan, as I like to say, that's going to be evolving into quote to cash and on the backs of Sales Hub, Service Hub, Commerce Hub that they have already, 248,000 customers that are soon going to be able to have CPQ and billing capability. I think that's very exciting for the SMB industry. And if there's going to be future winners in the space, and I'm in a deep dive to find who they're going to be, and you and I have talked about that a little bit, everywhere where there's a great quote-to-cash ISV, I want to have a great SI to be able to implement them.
Excellent. And what you left out a little bit now, and that's what I want to ask you about, is your path with Salesforce CPQ and billing, right? So tell me a little bit more about what you have to do with that solution right now, and then I have a couple of questions for you as well. But let's start there.
Well, sure. Well, let's start with a couple old school phrases. So I kind of refuse to get caught in the nomenclature. It's terrible how confused the market is right now. So I talk about old code bases and new code bases, old databases, new databases. And so 450 of my former customers, some of the largest in the world, are on an old code base. And today, all of the development at Salesforce is going into a new code base. I wish them well. They have a lot of engineering horsepower coming from the Veloce acquisition, from the Velocity acquisition, from the Steelbrick acquisition, from the Cloud Craze acquisition. There's a lot of smart folks that are in there and creating a multi-SKU solution that clients are going to be able to move forward with for managing their customers and revenue. However, let's not forget the thousands of customers that are on the old code base. And I think the safest way to say it is that no one predicted that in the first quarter of 2025, after a long, lengthy implementation and data migration to get on this old code base, that they would be operating in an environment where there's no new, meaningful, tangible, functional, or performance upgrades to that software. No one planned to be here. When I was working with my clients doing 3 and 5 year total cost of ownership, I didn't plan on a re-implementation. I didn't plan on a remigration. And so everyone, if they're aware of the situation, and most are not, and I've had unfortunate conversations where I had to be the bearer of bad tidings to let them know that you're operating the heartbeat of your revenue operations and CPQ and billing on software that is stagnant. And I've coined the phrase orphan revenue cloud customers for these old code base. And it's part of why I launched Craton with such fever to go after, what are the options in the space, Salesforce and otherwise. And as I mentioned before, I've kicked the tires with 65 CPQ and billing providers. And as you're aware, they're very fragmented. We sort them into 16 categories of CPQ and billing, CPQ and CLM, usage-based billing, right? And for our clients, every client is a little bit different. Every industry is a little bit different, and they require a different combination of CPQ and billing to manage their revenue operations. So it's unfortunate, but back to Craton, what clients need is they need to explore their options. And they're going to fit into one of three general criteria. I don't have the budget, the energy, the time to do another implementation and data migration. I'm just going to have to make do. So I think you're going to see consultancies that are focusing on maintaining the old code base and perhaps providing a degree of innovation that's outside. It has to be outside of the managed package, though. The next group is going to be evaluating Salesforce solutions. I want to stay on Salesforce, and people are kicking the tires with the new RCA, RCB. There I go. I'm using the words, but the new code base from Salesforce, and there's plenty of other really exciting on-platform and off-platform solutions that are worth consideration. And that's the third category. The third category is it's time for me to move on from the Salesforce quote to cash and try to find something that has a trajectory and a roadmap that is more in line with the monetization strategies and product and omni-channel strategies that particular client is going after.
Excellent. And just to clarify for anyone who's not that familiar with the Salesforce offerings, right? So you were talking about the Revenue Cloud Advanced product, and just a shameless plug here. So since we just issued the report on that one, you can find that online as a 20-page report that talks more about the details about that report. Anyway, that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to ask you also, what do you think is the biggest challenge existing customers will experience when transitioning from Salesforce Revenue Cloud to the Revenue Cloud Advanced, so to RCA?
Well, it's a very good question. They're very different products. So I don't claim to have deep knowledge of exactly how RCA. I'm familiar with the SKUs that they have broken them into. I love the headless concept that they're doing. I love the AI strategies that they're building into the product. But it's going to take a different kind of consultancy. We spoke on the last podcast that the best software in the world without a good implementer is not going to lead to a good outcome. And I'd even argue that the best SI and the best software in the world, if the client can't make up their mind and they want to pave the cart path, is also likely not to get to the outcome that they're looking at. So you really need this intersection of a great SI, great software, and then a great customer. I've been a little disappointed in the communication about what exactly is going on and what are the timelines that we should be working under. So I'm looking forward to more documentation, more demonstrations, more how does the product work? And the SI, when you're implementing a managed package, the composition of the team, I think, is going to be a little bit different than the composition of the team that's working in RCA, just based on the technology that's at play. I think there's going to need to be some very significant advisory services. Before advisory services and Revenue Cloud, old code base, let's look at your SKUs, let's look at your processes, if you're going through a transformation, let's go through price optimization. The old code base to new code base is going to require what are the customizations that were done. Really smart people like Max Rodman at Prodly are figuring out how out of the box old code base maps to out of the box new code base. The question is, what sort of customizations and extensions did you do? And how, if you want to replicate that functionality or take advantage of new functionality on the new code base, How are we going to do that mapping? And what is the data migration going to look like? So I think these first sets, until the industry and SIs figure it out, we were an early adopter of SteelBrick when they were acquired by Salesforce. And those first projects were really difficult. When it was replatformed, we had to go through, in some cases, a couple dozen implementations before we really figured out how the product worked and knew how to integrate it effectively with the client's legacy environment. So we're just at the cusp of that process now with Salesforce. And there's some very good consultancies, many of them right here in Missoula, Montana, that are working on this challenge. But like any new technology, even as powerful as we think this new code base will become, it's going to take a little bit of time for the ecosystem to be able to understand how to implement it efficiently. Salesforce itself has raised the dollars per in the ecosystem spent per dollar of software. They used to advertise 3, and then they advertised 4, and now they're saying 7. And that may be great for consultants, but that's not great for clients, right? Clients need better solutions in quote to cash. They need to be able to rely on things. They need to have trust in their ISVs and trust in their SI. And, it's hard to imagine a future where it's 7x dollars, beyond the price that we're paying for enterprise software now. And I'm sure you're probably going to have a few questions for me about AI, but we're in the process right now of exploring across we maintain an outcome library of 150 outcomes that are common in quote to cash, broken out by CPQ to order management, to contract management, to commerce, to billing and usage and consumption. And we, for decades now, have been trained to go buy an enterprise app to go do that. And in my opinion, the cost value ratio has been declining for a number of years. And so I'm glad that there's a new set of tools that are out there. But it doesn't mean that customers should spend more on enterprise applications to get the AI version of that. Now, that's the hope. Everybody wants to make money on the AI investments that they're making. But we're now finding that a lot of these incomes can be, these outcomes can be solved by non-enterprise app capability. I can't exist right now without Microsoft Copilot, keeping track of my private data on my SharePoint and my Teams and my Outlook. And so I think that you're going to see a lot of selling, a lot of potentially upsell, cross-sell renewals, even treatment and collection scenarios where people aren't logging into an enterprise app to do that. They're logging into some productivity software. So I think we're going to see a little bit of shifting of the dollars and of the responsibilities. I look forward to what that can be because, like I said, I think quote to cash as a craft and as outcomes of what clients should expect from software and consulting has been on the decline for a number of years. So I'm very pleased that there's a shakeup. And I should mention the third part of Craton that I didn't even get to is called talent development. So we are doubling down on the long relationship that we have at the University of Montana, and we're working with University of Montana president on a future initiative, which is trying to arm every student at the University of Montana and every educator and administrator and operator with understanding how AI can change the way that they do their jobs. And, we have to do that, right? The students are graduating in May, and we're working as hard as we can to create as many AI-enabled students so they can go join AI-enabled companies. And everybody's trying to figure it out at one time. So for the Craton team, it's again a real honor and privilege to be able to work with growing consultancies as well as the students, soon to be junior employees that are going to be driving their growth for the next several years.
Hello, everyone. If you have any questions concerning CPQ, consider contacting us at info@novocpq.com because we help customers with all kinds of questions related to CPQ. So we're involved in customer projects and we provide industry analyst services. So let me give you 2 examples on what helps a lot of customers regularly and see if that would be a help to you. The number one is we help customers find the right CPQ solution for them. We do that for customers of all sizes and all industries. I've been working in the industry since '96, and We help you to find the right solution. We do that with one-on-one meetings and projects, but we also do that through written reports. So we have the CPQ analyst report is our latest report. We currently have 6 and will soon have 7 available. And then throughout the year, we're striving to have around 20, hopefully more by the end of the year, and there will be even more reports. And we also help customers to stay up to date with what's happening in the CPQ world. If you already have a solution and you want to see what's new, we have a subscription that offers a number of hours and a monthly newsletter that shows what's happening in the CPQ space. It's our CPQ Circle subscription. If you have any questions about this, send us an email at info@novocpq.com. I have to apologize, but I want to go back on one thing you mentioned, right? So especially concerning these Salesforce customers, you have so much experience. You have lots of customers who are thinking about switching. Do you already have at this time any tips, early tips that what they should consider preparing their data or process to potentially transition to the new product, or is it too early for that?
I have a methodology in mind. I referenced it a little bit, that first you need to see what your budget is, what your appetite is, how is the current old code base environment working for you, right? The most important question that I ask an ISV in this space is, if you have 100 pennies, tell me where you're spending those pennies in your development. How much is going to building out a 1, 2, or a 3-year roadmap? How much is going to commitments to clients? How much to reduction of technical debt, to performance issues, to security issues? And generally, I get a kind of a blank stare. And then I know they really don't have a roadmap. They're kind of winging it. Or some will come and say, I mean, there's one vendor that I'm looking at right now that is releasing 2 or 3 times a month. And it's just highly disciplined. Here's the bug fix. Here's the customer impacted, customer promised capability. And here's a build out of the roadmap. Very rigorous, very intentional. They're going to be a winner in the space, right? Because of that intentionality. So first, clients need to figure out if they have appetite and budget to do something. If they need to do something, or can they get by with what they currently have? And if they're going to evaluate, everything about Craton is built to help people identify a short list, right? I think that we can prevent people from needing to go to consultancies and have 3 or 4 month long RFP cycles and things like that. Leveraging the expertise and the freshness of the relationships of knowing where everybody's at in terms of the quality of their product, the scalability of their product. So Craton can certainly help there. You help customers through that on a regular basis. MGI Research, G2, there's a lot of very credible vendors out there that are helping clients through that. But once you decide that you're going to make a new technology choice, I'm a big fan of making CPQ and billing systems decisions together, right? The same things that typically require a client that's using a CRM tool to require a dedicated CPQ tool is very often the same complexity. That means that their ERP-based billing system can't handle the complexity. So they need to have a recurring or usage-based or consumption-based biller to be able to tie together with the CPQ. We're excited to see that there are still people who believe in that. New.io and Monetize Now and HubSpot with their cash flow acquisition are 3 companies that are very serious about, right from the get-go, tying together CPQ and billing so it doesn't need to be done at the client site. For every other CPQ tool, it's critical that they understand what billing systems they typically implement with and have some form of partnership. And the same on the billing side, to make sure that they know the CPQ tools that they want to be working with and build solutions. The worst case is when you show up at a client kickoff and the CPQ vendor introduces themselves to the billing vendor, who introduces themselves to the payment processor, who introduces themselves to the CLM, and Deloitte is introducing to, and everybody's going to figure this out at the client site. So I'm a big fan of intentionality, whether you're an SI or an ISV, that you're building an ecosystem, all for the joint interests of getting your customers to the successful outcomes that they're at.
Excellent. Now I go back on another thing you mentioned, right? So with AI, because we've been talking about also on the podcast, I think for the last 2.5 years, more about AI than I have ever before, right? So, and there were tons of ideas how it could be used potentially on the user side, how it could be used on the admin side. So I would be interested, what do you think? Could have the most impact from your point of view with AI on CPQ?
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to start with the fact that I have AI on the phone, right? So I'm a human being and I want to learn stuff. I'm driving in my car and I pop up the AI and I start getting ready for my next meeting. So personal consumer AIs are going to help people be better at their jobs, period, whether you're a client, an ISV, or a consultant. Then what are all these tools that if I'm a consultant in CPQ, what are all the tools that my company is giving me to communicate with myself, with my peers, with my customers? Am I using Teams? Am I using Slack? What's my communication capability? What tools do I have to train and learn? So every step of the way, AI is changing the way that we learn, how we communicate, how we sell, how we implement. And so it's cliche that AI is really impacting everything. We're going through that rigorous exercise right now of those 150 outcomes and saying, and it's the most complicated spreadsheet, happy to share it with you and your listeners when it's completed, but it's a spreadsheet of these outcomes like win rate or deal size or reduced DSO or increased customer satisfaction. And what can Gen AI do built into one of these tools that you're logging into? What can Gen AI in a non-enterprise app, such as Copilot, do to support that outcome? And then, of course, agentic AI. And this is what's kind of blowing everybody's mind right now, right? Is in quote to cash, whether we're talking about long-running provisioning and inventory processes or fulfillment processes, fallout processes, treatment, collections, this ability for someone to have agents that are acting on their behalf to streamline the process. Give you an example. I was on the phone with a client a couple of days ago, and when they get a deal to closed won in CPQ, so they've gone through the negotiating process, you get closed won on the opportunity record, it takes 12 days for systems to be updated because I got to update this inventory system, this provisioning system, 3 different billing systems, this usage system, this mediation system, and it's all swivel chair. It's all a workflow where somebody has to go do that. That is easily automated, right? And it doesn't have to be agentic. That could just be automated, simple process automation. But it's going to be all different. And the consulting companies that I'm working with, what's going to change more? How we do project management with AI, how we do business analysis, how we do no code, low code, pro code development or testing. Every one of those in their own unique way is going to be impacted and if done right, improved by AI. However, I went through the cloud, on-premise to cloud, and I coined the term that a good consultant, I think, needs to be an evangelist that's looking to the promise of the future, but a curmudgeon that says what's ready and when is it ready. And there's a proliferation of AIs, and my forecast is we need fewer, smarter, more secure AIs that interoperate than more sporadic, untested, and who knows what's going to happen with the data, right? If we don't have some intentionality as an industry with how we go about this, things are going to get out of hand very quickly. I mentioned that I feel like the value to price ratio has been going down for the last several years. And part of that was companies were not being very transparent of the product's actual capability. And so I like to use the phrase marketecture versus architecture. So what do the slides say that it can do? And then what does the code base and the database and the procedural logic do out of the box? And that gap between marketecture and architecture was getting big. And now with AI, it's massive, right? And so everyone is promising that their AI is going to be great, right? Most of my clients have Salesforce on the front end, maybe SAP handling their supply chain, Oracle on the back end, maybe Workday for employee operations. They're all saying that their AI is going to win. I don't really consider a good environment where my salespeople are using this one, the finance people. In integrated quote to cash, we're saying you all need to work together. That is the point of integrated quote to cash. And so competing AIs are not going to help clients get to the outcome that I think they're looking for. So, and then when you get to point solutions like CPQ and billing, and if they're operating within a larger ecosystem, that we know several CPQ tools that are building AI, and how will that AI interoperate with the ecosystem within which it's going to need to operate within that client? That's a TBD.
And as you talked, Tom, I realized I didn't even clarify yet to our listeners, what are you focusing on, right? So the industries, the size of customers, the geography. Please talk a little bit about that also, so that everyone who listens to it is clear if and how you can help them potentially.
You bet. Really focus on B2B and historically mid-market to the largest enterprise clients.
Mid-market, clarify what that means for you, please.
Yeah, mid-market, we're saying maybe 100 million ARR type companies. So all kinds of technology, whether that's a high-tech manufacturing to software as a service to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, hyperscalers, anything with AI and data. And then what I like to call vertical SaaS, so ed tech, fintech, those sort of things. And honestly, a lot of it has to do with monetization strategies. If you're looking to do bundled recurring revenue, usage and consumption models, one-time purchases, commits and true ups and these sort of things, these are typically the monetization strategies that require CPQ or break your ERP-based biller. So it's more about those use cases and what industries are working in those use cases. But now with our work with HubSpot, we're moving into the SMB space. So Craton's going to be operating all the way from, SMB up to the largest Fortune 200 enterprises on a global basis.
And the focus is mostly North America, or you're taking on projects worldwide?
We're taking on projects worldwide with largely North America-based companies. But the world is pretty flat, and the intention is we're a big fan of training and intellectual property and what are the best practices in quote to cash, the best practices in CPQ, order management, and billing. And we believe in creating consultants from scratch, right? So the models that we built with ATG, starting with university, we then took to Argentina and leveraged those same models. When we were acquired by Cognizant, we then created an India-based quote to cash capability. So over time, these small consultancies are going to grow and likely grow beyond, just Montana consultancies. Several of them already are. But then the ability for you to be able to deploy resources nearshore and offshore, especially for the larger enterprise accounts, and create a unique value proposition and price point for your customer is important through the years.
And then I have one last question here, so which I thought you probably have an opinion to, because I see lots of customers mentioning right now business requirements concerning tariffs, right? So seems to be a timely topic, right? So I was just wondering, how much questions do you get in regards to that, and how do you respond from a CPQ perspective to these questions?
Oh, boy, I think you got me on that one, Frank. Well, but it's interesting because one of the things that we're seeing happen is I'm seeing hesitancy on enterprise purchases right now, right? I think it's warranted, right? Is everybody's trying to figure out AI internally within their own company, and then you're looking at buying CRM, and you're being told by all of your providers that their AI is the right one, right? And we're seeing that many customers are buying AI because there's a lot of pressure to have an AI story. But when we look under the hood, what we're seeing is they're buying a very little bit of AI for the smallest term possible to be able to kick the tires and understand it. That then is being translated as AI is flying off the shelves. It's like, okay, well, it's not really flying off the shelves. You're selling a lot of it, but it's largely to the CTO organization, not to the function responsible, right? And so and we learned with DeepSeek that it's hard to figure out what the cost of goods sold is for providing AI. And so how we're monetizing AI, that's the big thing that's going to be changing in quote to cash. Salesforce is famously saying they're going to move 8 billion in per seat revenue for Service Cloud to 8+ billion in usage and consumption. I'd be really pleased to be Meter right now and New.io right now and Metronome right now, working in that space, and several others, right? Because I think we're going to see a massive shift. What we saw with people moving to recurring revenue is not going to go away. That now the proliferation of use and consumption models is going to be pretty profound over the next several years.
Excellent. We went much over what we wanted to talk about time-wise, right? So, but I think it was super interesting. So, but now I have to ask you the last question before we close: is what's a good way for interested listeners to contact you or your team if they have any follow-up questions?
You bet. There's just 3 of us, so I encourage you to go to the Craton Consulting website or find us on LinkedIn. And I really encourage people that are interested in quote to cash and ServiceNow to reach out to the whole group. That's the whole WHOLE group. Jorge and team will take good care of you. And folks that are interested in evolutions in billing to consider Ravus, RAVUS. And then anyone that's interested in what HubSpot's doing in quote to cash, the Insight Studio out of Belgrade, Montana is a great place to start.
Perfect. We will have as many of these links as possible in the show notes. Tom, thank you very much for making time for the CPQ podcast today.
Thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure.
I'd like to thank everyone for listening and hope you learned something interesting today. If you like the podcast, please go ahead and rate it on iTunes or share it with your friends and colleagues. In the meantime, you can find us online at www.novocpq.com. So long, everyone.